Hello everyone, welcome to another session of online learning. In last class, we had studied the topic of what a problem and hypothesis is in psychological research and statistics. However, in today's class, we'll be taking up another topic similar to the line, that is, what are variables in psychological research. As your facilitator, I, CGK Sani, Assistant Professor in the Department of Psychology from the Bhopal School of Social Sciences, will be taking up today's course. Well, before we begin, let us go through the contents of today's class. We'll be studying what is the meaning of a variable. We'll also be checking what are the different types of variables. And lastly, we'll be checking what are the various techniques of controlling extraneous variables. So as I said, the first topic that we will be covering is the meaning of a variable. As you can see on screen, a variable is anything that varies. From the word itself, what we mean by is any value that keeps on changing, we consider it as variable. More specifically, we would say variables can be defined as any of the characteristics or attributes of an event, object, things and beings around us that can be measured or observed. So variables, as I mentioned, are the characteristics or any kind of condition that can be manipulated, controlled, or is specifically chosen to be observed by the experimenter. For example, in an experimental research, if I want to choose people or sample of a population from different income backgrounds, or people from different educational backgrounds, or if I want to measure what kind of achievement level different kind of people have, now these are all different kind of characteristics which I can change according to the need of the hour. Moving on to another topic of our day, we are saying what are the different kinds of variables that we come across. Well, there are various ways via which we can actually classify them. One is the viewpoint of causation. The other one is the viewpoint of what kind of design do we choose in a study. And lastly, we can also actually check what kind of measurement unit the variables hold. From the viewpoint of causation, well, what it means is that we wish to study what is the cause and effect relationship between the variables that we have chosen for our study. On that basis, we can have these number of changes or these number of variables in our study. The first one is the IV, or also known as the independent variable. Well, this is the variable whose impact actually we wish to see. The presence or absence of it will bring a change, will bring the effect on the variable that we wish to study. For example, if I say smoking causes cancer, I wish to see that the people who smoke, does the impact of smoking have an impact of them having cancer later on, or the absence of not smoking in their life actually leads to having a non-cancerous life. I wish to see the presence of smoking and absence of it. And well, in that scenario, smoking becomes my IV. The second variable in this causation related point is the dependent variable. Well, dependent variable is the variable upon which the impact happens, upon which that change we actually wish to see. So when I say smoking causes cancer, I wish to see the impact is actually seen upon the health of the individual. We wish to see that whether the act of smoking will actually bring a change in the health of the person or not. So in that scenario, the health of the person or his physical health will become the dependent variable. Thirdly, we also have extraneous variables. Extraneous variables are those variables which we actually do not intend to study as such, but they are those real life situations or factors which can intervene in between your study and actually can have an impact upon your study. The fourth one is an intervening variable. Well, as I said in the beginning of this point, that we wish to study in this what is the cause and effect of two variables, what is the cause and effect between two variables, right? Sometime between an independent variable as well as a dependent variable, there might be a need of one intervening variable which actually strengthens or magnifies the relationship or the impact of IV upon DV, and that is what we mean by as intervening variable. Well, when we study the types of variables, the second factor to look into, what is the study of design that we are going to have? Well, according to that, the variables that we can divide in the design of study is active variables as well as attribute variables. Active variables are those variables which can be deliberately manipulated, right? They can be changed according to the need of the experimenter. They can be controlled as per the need of the hours as well. As I've stated over here, I've given the example of teaching models. Suppose I wish to study the impact of different teaching models on the performance of the student, right? What kind of students I have in class, I don't change that. However, I change the teaching models method. In one of the classes, I take up the discussion method. In another class, I take up the method of debates. In another method, I take up the aspect of presentation. Well, these are different teaching models and I'm changing them as per my need. So they become the active variables. Well, if I have to explain the attribute variables, these are those variables as per what I have planned in my study. If I'm not able to change a particular value in my study, a particular characteristic in my study, well, that characteristic becomes the attribute variables. For example, as I gave the example of different teaching models in a class, what kind of gender all my students have, what kind of strength and ratio, how many girls are there, how many boys are there, well, I can't change at that point of time, right? What kind of eye color my students have, I cannot change that. Suppose I wish to take up this example in a B.Ed class. Now, what is the age group in a B.Ed class? I cannot specify as such for this particular study. So that becomes the attribute variable in that scenario. In our last category, which is the unit of measurement, we have two major categories, that is the categorical variable and a continuous variable. Well, what is a categorical variable? Any variable which you can actually put into some kind of categories, and that can be measured on nominal or ordinal scale. They will be considered as those variables known as the categorical variables. I'll give you an example according to the types that you see on your screen. Constant variables would be those variables which would have only one category. Suppose I say I take up the variable of water. I take up the variable of taxi. That is going to remain just one constant variable in that research study. I take up the second example or the second type, that is the dichotomous variable. Well, what I mean by it is, suppose I divide my variables into two different categories. I take them as boy or girl, or I take them in the option of yes or no. Well, that makes it the dichotomous variable. The third one is polytomous variable, which refers to if I have more than two categories in my research study. Suppose I wish to make a study on 3 different religions of India and I take up Hinduism, Sikhism and Christianity. In that category, I'm having more than 2, and that's why it will become as a polytomous variable. Now, how is a categorical variable different from a continuous variable? A continuous variable is something that will have an arbitrary point of measurement. This would be a variable whose value can be brought down to the minutest point. For example, for continuous, I wish to take up the example of age. Age is a factor which can be brought down. If I have to put down its value, it can be brought down to the factor, to the minutest value. For example, somebody's age can be 30 years, 9 months, 42 days, 42 days, 2 weeks, 6 hours, so many minutes and so many seconds. So now I have reduced it down to the minutest value. In the continuous variable, the values have very fixed number of ranges, and therefore it can also be measured in the other ratios of measurement, in the other scales of measurement. The last two categories in the same division that we have are qualitative as well as quantitative variables. As the name goes, I don't think it will require much explanation. Qualitative variables are those which cannot be brought down to a unit of measurement as such. They cannot be put into values, they cannot be put into magnitude. I cannot be using two variables in this scenario and say A is greater in size than B. However, for quantitative, I can say that the values can be measured in the form of size or magnitude. I can say XYZ's salary is greater than ABC's salary. However, for qualitative, we usually go into the topics or take up the topics or take up those kind of issues which can only be nominally attributed. They cannot be put down into magnitude or size. For today's class, the last thing that we are going to discuss about is how can we control the different kinds of extraneous variables which we as such do not intend to study but however can have an impact upon the dependent variables. So in that scenario, I've listed out 3 basic ways. One is a technique of elimination. The another one is keeping the constancy of condition. And the third one is randomization. Well, techniques of elimination refer to, and this is the simplest method of controlling extraneous variable. Suppose if you know what kind of extraneous variable can have an impact upon your study, you try to eliminate before your study begins. Suppose if I have a study and I know noise can be a nuisance factor in my study, I try to have my study in such an area wherein I can eliminate the effect of noise as much as possible. It sounds simple, however, this scenario of research study is not that simple. So this might be very basic method of doing it, however, it might not be possible in all the aspects. In those scenarios, we go on for the next 2 points. The other factor that we can ensure to minimize the effect of extraneous variable is to make the conditions constant. For example, like I provide equal kind of treatment to all my experimental as well as control groups. For example, I give the same set of instructions to all the people involved in the experiment. I give the same kind of lighting conditions. This would be an example, or this would be a way of keeping the conditions constant. The third point that we have in today's class is the last method of controlling extraneous variable, and that is randomization. Randomization is a way via which I do not choose on my own, rather I use a process of random selection, and I do not know what kind of sample I'm going to select, what kind of people I'm going to select, and that ensures that there is no form of biasness in my study. Suppose if I wish to have a study of mental health in my class, I do not pick up the students, however I do it by a chit system. So I do not pick any student that is my favorite or somebody who is closely connected to me, rather it's left out to a random procedure that ensures no form of biasness. Well, that is all that we had for today's class. We'll meet for the next session the next time. Thank you.